Let me take you back in time. The year was 2016. Planes and drones hovered over the city of Mosul. Multiple airstrikes were carried out. They were targeted at the Islamic State militants of Iraq. But they ended up killing civilians. The dense streets of Mosul were filled with ordinary people. Some were prevented from leaving. Others were also frightened to cross the front lines and escape. Do you know who was behind this massacre? The United Kingdom. The UK military claimed to have fought a perfect war in Iraq, that British weapons did not harm a single civilian. But the survivors have a different story to tell. Have a look at this report by Guardian. It tells the stories of the victims that have surfaced now. One survivor lost her eldest daughter when a missile exploded near them. She had to have both her legs amputated. A second daughter still has shrapnel in her skull. Her son, just a toddler at the time, lost parts of a foot and hand. Another woman lost her mother, father, 2 siblings and 2 nephews as a missile destroyed their home. What do the UK and the US have to say for themselves? The US-led coalition accepted civilian casualties from airstrikes, but it did not say which country fired the weapons. In total, across the 6 strikes identified as British attacks, the coalition accepts killing only 26 civilians. Isn't this what the West does? It treats third world countries as its playground. It stations its troops posing as saviors, butchers people left, right and center, and then never takes accountability for this. The atrocities began in 2003 on the 20th of March. The US and allied forces invaded Iraq. They toppled Saddam Hussein's regime. The US had claimed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, that it was a threat to international peace. Most countries refused to support military action against it. They waited for the UN and International Energy Authority to find evidence. But the US refused to wait for the inspections. It assembled a coalition of the willing against Iraq. Of the 30 countries in the coalition, the UK, Australia and Poland participated in the invasion. It was a war built on lies, on imagination instead of facts. It was driven by fear and not hard intelligence, and it was waged by 2 men, George Bush and Tony Blair. Before ordering the invasion, Bush said that he could not wait for the final proof. Tony Blair said it was beyond doubt that Saddam Hussein was producing weapons of mass destruction. He dismissed anti-war demonstrations, saying history would be his judge. And yet, Iraq had no nuclear program, no poison gases, no shells filled with deadly viruses. UN inspectors had scoured the country for months. But what was it all about? The UK began bombing Iraq again in 2014. It targeted IS fighters. Strikes in Syria began a year later. Between 2014 and 2020, it dropped over 4,000 munitions in the 2 countries. The British military claims those strikes killed over 3,000 militants in Syria. Over 1,000 militants were killed and only 1 civilian died. The US-led coalition killed 1,437 civilians during that period. How is it possible that the UK killed only 1 of them? And why does it continue to lie? This month, we mark the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, a war that cost nearly $3 trillion, that took nearly 584,000 lives. And these figures are only for direct deaths. Many more died due to diseases, displacement, and starvation. The UK and the US have moved on, but Iraq is still in shambles. Have a look at this video.
Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway. 75.
Did you hear that? George Bush accidentally said Iraq instead of Ukraine, and the audience laughed. He made a joke out of his slip up. Some called it a Freudian slip. He blamed it on his age. This is how trivial the Iraq war has become for the Americans, for the man who gave the orders for the invasion himself. But in Iraq, people still struggle with the trauma of that war. Listen to this now.
In the beginning, they said, oh, it's about removing this threat to world and weapons of mass destruction. And then they didn't find any and couldn't even manufacture. So then they shifted and said, oh, it's about democracy. But if you go now and ask Iraqis, do we have a democracy in Iraq? No. We have an oligarchy. We have one of the most corrupt systems in the world.
The UK and the US launched an illegal war of aggression. They committed war crimes. Today, they cry sanctions against Russia. But what about what they did in Iraq? 20 years on, the leaders have never faced criminal charges. The US troops are still stationed in Iraq. When will the West be held accountable? WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the updates on the move.